Today, we're jumping into the mind of one of history's greatest intellectual warriors, Voltaire. He was a philosopher, a writer, and, let's be honest, a total troublemaker, whose ideas are, as you're about to see, shockingly relevant right now.
So think about this. In 2015, after the horrific Charlie Hebdo attack in Paris, a brutal assault on free speech, whose face did people turn to for inspiration? Not some modern celebrity or politician. No, it was this guy, Voltaire. His face was suddenly all over posters, and sales of his book, Treatise on Tolerance, just went through the roof. And that really gets to the heart of what we're talking about today. What is it about Voltaire that makes his voice still echo so powerfully hundreds of years later? Especially when fanaticism and intolerance are on the rise. What was his secret weapon?
Well, to really get the legend, you have to start with the man. See, he wasn't born Voltaire. He was born François-Marie Arouet in Paris, way back in 1694. And from a very young age, he was amazing at two things: writing brilliantly and getting himself into a ton of trouble.
I mean, this just shows you how fearless he was. As a young man, he writes this poem making fun of one of the most powerful dudes in France, the Duc d'Orléans, and he accuses him of something scandalous. What happens? Boom! He gets thrown into the infamous Bastille prison. But this wasn't some youthful mistake, it was a calculated move. He was already using his wit as a weapon.
But you know what? Prison didn't shut him up. It actually transformed him. Inside those walls, François-Marie Arouet basically dies, and Voltaire is born. That's the name that would become famous and, yeah, feared all across Europe. He walked out of there not as a scared kid, but as a hardened intellectual, totally ready for a fight.
So what was he fighting for? Well, once he was forged in the fire of the Bastille, Voltaire pretty much dedicated his entire life to battling one single, monstrous enemy. An enemy he gave a very special name. He called it l'infâme, or the infamous thing.
Écraser l'infâme, crush the infamous thing. This wasn't just some catchy tagline. It became his personal slogan, his mission statement. He would sign off his letters with it. It was basically his declaration of war against what he saw as the greatest evils of his day.
So what exactly was l'infâme? For Voltaire, it was this toxic mix of religious fanaticism, intolerance, and the abuse of power, especially by the church and the state. He saw how this infamous thing led to nothing but suffering and death, and he was determined to expose it with the most powerful tool he had, reason. And this epic battle against l'infâme really hit its peak in his most famous work, Candide. This book is short, it's hilarious, and it's deeply disturbing. It was Voltaire's masterpiece of satire, basically a literary missile aimed right at the heart of any philosophy that tried to justify suffering and injustice. Now, the main target of the book was this really popular philosophy at the time called Leibnizian optimism. The idea, which he pokes fun at with the character Professor Pangloss, was that everything that happens, no matter how awful it seems, is actually for the best, because we live in the best of all possible worlds. And then reality hit. Hard. In 1755, a massive earthquake, followed by a tsunami and fires, completely destroyed the city of Lisbon. Tens of thousands of people died in a single day. For Voltaire, this was it. This was the ultimate devastating proof that blind optimism was total nonsense. How could anyone possibly say this was for the best? And that's the whole journey of the book, right here. We start on the left with Pangloss's ridiculous mantra, but after seeing earthquakes, wars, and just endless cruelty, Candide finally rejects it. He ends up with a much simpler, more practical idea on the right. We must cultivate our garden. Basically, forget all the abstract nonsense and focus on what you can actually do to make your little corner of the world a bit better. But Voltaire wasn't just writing books for the public. Nope, he took his ideas straight to the top. He was writing to and advising some of the most powerful people in all of Europe, the absolute monarchs.
He was a huge believer in what we now call enlightened absolutism. The basic idea was that a king or queen, if they were armed with the ideas of reason and tolerance from thinkers like him, could fix society from the top down. He even famously went to live at the court of Frederick the Great of Prussia, hoping his philosophy could literally shape a nation. And Voltaire's influence didn't stop at the edges of Europe. His ideas about reason, justice, and tolerance, well, they crossed the Atlantic Ocean and played a seriously important role in the founding of a brand new nation, the United States of America.
And you can see a direct line here. Historians have shown that Voltaire's writings, especially his nonstop campaigns against torture and injustice, directly influenced the people who wrote American law. His ideas are literally woven into the U.S. Constitution, most clearly in the Eighth Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishment. That's his legacy, right there in law.
Okay, so let's circle all the way back to that final, profound piece of advice from Candide. Because to really get what Voltaire left us with, we have to understand what he meant by cultivating our garden. But first, we have to clear up a huge misconception about him. This is probably the most famous thing Voltaire ever said. It's the perfect summary of free speech and tolerance, the very things he fought for his whole life. There's just one tiny problem. He never said it, not once. He never even wrote it. The line was actually written by his English biographer, a woman named Evelyn Beatrice Hall, in 1906. She wrote it to summarize his attitude. And while it's a brilliant summary, the words just aren't his. The actual lesson he left us with is a bit more down to earth.
Cultivating our garden means turning away from endless, useless philosophical debates and focusing on real, tangible work. It's about improving your own community, your own home. It's about engaging in work that keeps you away from what he called the three great evils: boredom, vice, and poverty. It's a philosophy of doing practical, meaningful things, not just sitting back.
Which brings us to one last big question for today. When we're all facing these massive global problems, climate change, political extremism, pandemics, is Voltaire's advice to just focus on our own small patch of grass still good advice? Is cultivating our own garden an act of wisdom, or is it a retreat from a world that really needs our help? Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.